Welcome out to everyone, and welcome to another episode of Psych Talk. Now we understand that we've been offline for a while, but today we have some really good content for you. And today we also have a very important topic, and with me today is a very important person in this field as well. So today our discussion will sort of center around the discussion will center around peer-to-peer mental health and how the support in this area has sort of grown, how it's being established. And today we're going to really talk to someone who's been a pioneer in Fiji, and her work in the school that she is in international secondary school. It's really preceded itself in terms of the amount of impact that it's had on the students. And today we really have a special guest. So once again, thank you very much, Madam Robyn, for being here. We know that you've had such a busy schedule, and we're just really thankful that you could take the time to come and be with us today. How are
Yeah,
you feeling?
good. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Call me Robyn. It's just lovely to be a part of such a special
Yeah,
podcast, and I value the work that your podcast is doing and the information that your podcast is sharing with the country of Fiji. So well done to you. It's a great idea. It's a great initiative, and the Fiji Psych Society. It's a good initiative. Yeah, I like it.
thank you. Yeah, the Fiji Psych Society. Yeah, we've been trying to do some work in terms of like trying to get the ball rolling on practitioners and how things are going and how we stand as a profession and as a community. And I'm just glad that we have a lot of good people behind us, and we have some really skilled individuals like yourself that are part of the community as well. So there's a lot that we can learn. And for our viewers, Robyn, one thing that they don't know is the amount of extensive experience that you have. Like you have uh, your experience and the qualifications that you bring to the table is sort of it really speaks for itself in terms of the work that you do and the amount of good work that you've been doing so far. That I just wanted to understand a bit more about the background that you came from. What was it like, and how did you sort of end up being in this field?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting question, and it really all boils down to a quarter life crisis. I'll be honest with you, Dan. But I'll tell you, I'll tell you the full story and how it all began. Was I was born in South Africa, and of course we have a country that's full of cultural diversity in South Africa, and that's where I started on this journey through psychology. I studied at UNISA, or University of South Africa, and that's where I completed my bachelor's in psychology and health science and social services. But I really specialized at that stage in industrial psychology. And at that stage, I started to get a bit anxious, a little bit restless, wasn't sure whether I wanted to settle down. And I kind of took a little bit of a leap of faith back in 2011, and found myself in the middle of the Asawa group of islands for 5 years. And again, I was
Well,
introduced to our local Matangali and different cultural nuances from here in Fiji, which were absolutely beautiful. Uh, so that also added to my cultural mixing pot. And my husband is British, and him and I met while I was in the Asawa group of islands, and we kind of started our journey and ended up in New Zealand for a little, and Sri Lanka for a little, and came back to Fiji. So again, we had more ingredients into the cultural pot of awesomeness. And then we came back to Fiji, and I started working at International School Nandi. And that has been an incredible journey to be able to work with cultures from all over the world. So today I find myself working with cultures from, for example, Pakistan, the Netherlands, Japan, Tonga, France, and Australia, New Zealand. So all of these, again, beautiful ingredients are coming together in this mixing pot of cultures. And it just made me realize how important our culture really is, and understanding each of our clients from their own cultural perspective, not only um, from their ethnic culture, but also from their personal culture. We all have our own personal backgrounds and personal histories that also add to our own individual culture. So everybody, each human being is just so unique. It's a beautiful thing. So that's what I love about my job and how I ended up here in Fiji. But yeah, and through all this, I also started doing a bit of studies through University of South Pacific, and that led me onto a journey of different kinds of therapies, narrative exposure therapy, a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy, person-centered therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, just a lot of different techniques and trades that I could use along the way as you're working with each of these individual clients and adding it into this beautiful, beautiful cooking pot once again. So I would say I'm just a cooking pot of culture and information. Is that is how I would describe myself.
Oh, well, I think the cooking pot's working real well right now because the work that you're doing is really amazing. And I think I just like I think that the amount of cultures that you've come from and the amount of cultures you've gotten to experience, it really provides like a real breadth of understanding and it's a huge tool and an asset towards a practitioner in itself. I just wanted to know, like, what was that experience like being able to travel in between, and what was it like for you personally?
So for me personally, how I've evolved is at first when I was young and hadn't gained as much experience, I wouldn't necessarily be able to approach a situation without forgetting about my own cultural background. How I feel like I've developed and changed after all these experiences is often as I approach meeting somebody for the very first time, I imagine them as if they were a completely blank slate or blank piece of paper, irrespective of what you're looking at, irrespective of what the person looks like, irrespective of what they're dressed like, irrespective of their accent, um, irrespective of many different details, is how I like to really get to know people is to ask them about their personal background and their personal culture. And that's how all these experiences have helped me become who I am. So what was it like for me? In the beginning, I don't think I was an expert at being able to let go of my individual experiences when meeting somebody. As I've started working with more cultures, I've been able to um, I don't think we'll ever be perfect at it, but I've been able to almost um,
Mm.
reduce the amounts of my culture influencing my one-on-one sessions. And in that way, I can understand the client
Yeah.
more easily, and it's actually a more effective session. And all but that goes through all my practices, even the peer-to-peer support program that we'll talk about later on. Yeah.
Mm, okay. And that's a really huge thing, like in terms of understanding and just being aware of your own nuances and because of your cultural understanding and our own worldview, it really plays a huge part. And it's just interesting because I've, I don't think that we've come across in our podcast someone that's had such a
Yeah.
multicultural
Yeah.
experience. It's yeah, and it's such a it's such a great pleasure to be able to speak to someone that's experienced all these different cultures. Now, I just wanted to ask him. This is really just because of curiosity's sake. Now, in terms of Fijian culture, because you've come down and you've settled down here. Now, what exactly drew you to the idea of that Fiji was sort of going to become home?
Well, for me, what I particularly enjoy about being here in Fiji is, well, I suppose it all started one day back in back in 2011. I'm not sure when the study was actually released, but or the marketing campaign. But there was a campaign released that uh, Fiji was found to be the happiest um, nation in the world. And of course, that got me thinking about happiness and what makes people in Fiji so happy. And that's where my professor at University of the South Pacific directed me to the PERMA model, which is actually an assessment that you could find out what really makes somebody happy. And one of the factors that they highlight within an individual is relationships. So, and that's almost a sense of belonging here in Fiji. So for me, the sense of belonging here that the Fijian culture creates, actually, I'd love to be able to study this and see what the results would be. But happiness, my hypothesis would be that happiness is related to the relationships that people have here, and that brings them all together, and that actually leads us to being happy. And Lance Sito might yell at me after this podcast, but I'll never forget chatting to Lance Sito a few years ago, and he described how he arrived in Fiji during a difficult time in his life. And as he arrived off the plane, we had just had a Category 5 cyclone, and as he arrived off, somebody was playing a guitar, and they were singing Bula Malay. And he was aware that the country had recently been devastated by a cyclone, and yet he still found somebody who was happy enough to be singing and welcoming people to their country. And that's when he also got thinking about what makes people so happy. And a credit to Lance Sito, he was the one who set me down this, I think he's thinking about a book called The Rabbit Hole. So he also set me down my own rabbit hole about how, what is it? Is it relationships that bring people together and make them happier? And yeah, I think that is one of the things that makes people in Fiji so happy. And that's what led me to want to stay, is that I could feel as though I also belonged. I also had a purpose. And that was one of the bigger reasons that I decided to stay.
Mm. It's such and it's always so interesting, like hearing accounts from people from other cultures whenever they speak about my country or our country. It's because this I've come across a lot of people in my lifetime that have sort of fallen in love with the culture. And sure, there are things that might be slower in terms of other cultures, but then at the same time, there's always this sense of just feeling like there's always a sense of belonging in terms of how people are so friendly and how people relate to each other. Now, in terms of your work and in terms of how you conduct your work with the people here and with the cultures, has that also been a factor, like how people view relationships and how people have been so welcoming? How has that impacted the
Is
work
that,
that
for
you do?
example, how people uh, welcome other people? Am I understanding right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, as far as the welcoming goes, here in Fiji, and the openness, and now that you're mentioning it, there is quite a big openness, and a sense of welcoming as people arrive in the country,
Mm,
and that's really, again, what draws people to coming back time after time for their vacations, is because they feel welcomed when they arrive for the first time. But not only that, and I'd also love to identify how this happens, but um, the fact that somebody remembers your name, even if you return to the country 7 years later. I've seen this happening within the hospitality industry time after time after time. And often a guest at one of the resorts will come up and they'll say, how does this person remember my name after 7 years? And they always had created a bond within a short amount of time. And for me, that could be incredibly interesting to see and find out
mm.
more about, is how does that happen?
And it's really sort of like this cultural anomaly, really, because one thing about from talking with you earlier, you sort of hinted at idea about your experiences in the different modems of therapy. And you also talked about something that's key, and it'll probably segue into our next discussion. But you also talked about how you've also helped students in terms of directing them in the sort of path that they
Yeah.
would want to be in. Maybe if
Yeah.
you can
So
talk more about
another
that.
part of my journey was as I started working with more youth and adolescent groups, I started to do a couple of studies on what it's like to work in a counseling context with them. So after I completed a certificate in youth and adolescent counseling, I also ended up uh, doing a qualification with the Myers-Briggs company in Australia on the
Yeah,
Strong Interest Inventory. So often while I was working with the students,
yeah,
the Strong Interest Inventory would pop its head up because often as they reach the age of 17 or 18 or even 16, some of the students tend to lose a little bit of motivation at school. I'm not sure. I mean, if I think back to when I was 16 or 15, often I would find myself in the middle of a maths class or a science lesson and I'm going, why am I here? What am I ever going to use science for? What am I ever going to
yeah,
use maths
yeah,
for? And I would go home to my mom at the time and I would be like, that's it. I'm not taking maths anymore. And yeah, obviously being an adolescent at the time, not realizing the benefits that this particular subject would give you. But what I'm finding now is that motivating students by making a link between what they're studying in class to what they're going to become as an adult actually helps to improve their motivation. So going to a 16-year-old in a science lesson and asking him, what would you like to be when you grow up? And the student might say, I'd like to be a pilot, or pilot is one of the most regular careers that we hear here in Fiji. But let's say they say, I'd like to be a pilot or an engineer. And then what we'll do is we'll relate how maths is actually going to benefit you because you're going to need maths as you become a pilot, or you're going to need maths as you become an engineer. And you almost see this light bulb moment within the 16-year-old going, ah, okay, so maybe there is a reason that I'm sitting hour after hour through these lessons because so it's almost just connecting the dots to say this is why it's important to do that. And the Strong Interest Inventory helps the student to take the psychometric assessment. It tests their interests and compares it to occupations within I believe it's within USA, possibly Australia. I could stand to be corrected on that. But what it does is it measures the students' interests and says, you seem to have the same interests as people who are firefighters. Have you considered becoming a firefighter? Or you seem to share the same interests as um, a physiotherapist. Have you considered becoming a physiotherapist? Where we as Fiji can almost remold and adapt to this psychometric assessment is I'd like to see how we could adapt the assessment to occupations that are more relevant to Fiji. For example, if we find a student and they have the same interests as somebody who works at NASA, we don't necessarily have a space program here in Fiji. But what we could do is maybe recommend that they explore the Fiji metro service and maybe begin a career within the weather systems. So understanding the assessment and then bring the assessment a more practical situation when you're working with the students has been incredibly useful. Uh, so yeah, it's been quite a journey helping some of the students deciding which career they want to do. And finances is so important for us here in Fiji as well, because that family may have to then finance a degree at USP, or they may have to finance a degree at FNU. And not all of our families are lucky enough to be in a situation where they can do that. Some of them have to consider getting part-time work while they study. Some of them may consider exploring an F&PF loan. So that's why it's important to work with each individual and their family, because again, culturally in Fiji, family is an incredibly big part of making these decisions. So just asking the student, they might feel offended because they might want to ask mom or dad or gran, how would you feel if I studied engineering? Because gran might say, I'd really like you to study something different. So the family dynamic has to be considered when they're exploring their careers. But the strong interest inventory is just part of that decision-making process for the young adult.
And it's such a huge jump from the sort of peer mentoring that we got when we were young, because having these inventories like the Myers-Briggs inventory, having all these tools of psychometrics, because it's sort of a very quantitative and tailored suit towards actually guiding people. Because back then, I remember growing up as a young Fijian boy in Suva, it was normally they just asked you what you wanted to be, and it's just based off that discussion, and then there's not really any sort of science behind it. And having having you be a tool I feel like it's really important, because it really helps in actually quantifying what our interests
Yeah.
and where it might get us. And yeah, I really have to commend you for the work that you're
Yeah.
doing. It's really amazing. Yeah, and in terms of how this is sort of related in terms of how these inventories and these tools of psychometrics, when you use them in the setting, in Fijian setting, or in the student with the students that you currently deal with, uh, what's the experience like, and how important is it to you to have those tools in play, or in your possession when you're handling these
So the
sorts of cases?
experience is definitely understanding the student from their perspective and their family's perspective. So one of the first things we'll do is invite, again, not just the student, we invite the family members to come and have a cup of tea. It'll be in an informal setting. And then we'll start to find out, what does mom do? What does dad do? How many people are staying in the house? Um, who's um, who's contributing to the family day-to-day runnings of the household? Is there anybody working full-time? Is there anybody staying at home full-time? To get an idea of what's happening for that student's background. So that would be one of the first things I would do in my experience working with it. And then what we would do following that is, um, I I'd get a gauge on whether or not the family has been able to save some funds for a degree, or whether the family is at this stage thinking about an F&PF loan, or have they thought about it, or is it going to be the student funding their own studies, and will they work part-time while they do it? So that's the first step. Then the next step, the actual assessment. What we have to do is ensure that the student themselves is feeling comfortable. So I've been able to work through the assessment with a student who was in the age group of about 15. And some of the wording in the assessment, they asked for help with, where they wouldn't necessarily understand. And this was from, I think this particular student was from a New Zealand background, and there was a word that they weren't necessarily sure on. I'll just say, for example, autopsy, and they just needed to clarify, what does the word autopsy mean.
Mm.
So depending on the student's age, or the, if I can gauge their vocabulary, I'll either choose to stay nearby the student, or I'll leave the student on their own, because you'd like the student to be able to give their honest answer when they're taking their assessment. So as they're taking the assessment, they are either saying, I strongly enjoy doing this activity, or I strongly do not enjoy doing this activity. And then the question will be like, do you enjoy photography? And they'll say, I really do enjoy this, or I really don't enjoy this. And they'll go through each of the different questions. So It's important to make sure that the student isn't just going, yes, I love this, yes, I love this, yes, I love this, yes, I love this, yes, I love this. They've got to be able to find a balance within the assessment. And what's fantastic about the Myers-Briggs assessment is that their team has been able to set up the assessment to ensure reliability, to ensure validity, to make sure that if the student is going, yes, I love this, yes, I love this, yes, I love this, yes, I love this, it does have an indication within their results that may say, we've noticed that the student on the day may have been influenced as they were answering their questions, or we feel like on the day that the student maybe wasn't being consistent with their answers in the assessment. And then the assessment actually tells you, perhaps try this assessment another time with the student. So the experience with the assessment is making sure that the family are comfortable with the assessment, and then making sure that the individual themselves is comfortable with the assessment. So quite a lot that goes into it. But luckily, when you're working with a company like Myers-Briggs, I find it, for me, reassuring to know that the team members behind the assessments are there to support us as practitioners as we're interpreting the results.
Mm. Yeah, and uh, it's always such an interesting component of the work in terms of having having those inventories in place, but also having the necessary support to ensure that the inventories are effective. Yeah. I believe the team at Myers-Briggs has been really influential. Now, in terms of support and in terms, because we're talking about students here and student life, as we all know, in different points, sometimes it can get a little tricky because you're navigating through your own development while at the same time, uh, going through different things in terms of your personal life, while also trying to navigate
Mhm.
education as well. Now, your work and we're going to talk about this because I feel like this is such an amazing program. Now, you established a peer-to-peer support program in international school that's really making waves, and it's appealing to the idea that students can be supportive towards each other. Now, I just want to understand like what the program I'm talking about here is the Buddy program, an initiative that for our viewers, Robyn had created, and she sort of was the mind behind this initiative that she's implementing in international school, where it's a form of peer-to-peer mental health support that's sort of designed to bridge that gap between the older and the younger students, and to have them work as supportive mechanisms for each other. Now, I just wanted to understand, like, what was the inspiration behind this program, and where did this program come from? How did it all
Yeah,
come to
so
begin?
a great question is what's happening on a larger scale, not only in our school, but within our country and potentially globally in many parts of the world, is there's such a big treatment gap between a person who needs assistance and then being able to receive assistance from one-to-one therapy or counseling sessions. We wanted to find a way on a small scale within our school for students who would like to reach out for help to be able to reach out without feeling uncomfortable. Sometimes reaching out to an adult for a youth or an adolescent can be quite scary. But because they're spending so much time with their peers, they feel more comfortable being able to reach out to somebody their own age. And the peer groups are more influential for them. So what we wanted to do is make sure that the information they were getting from their peers wasn't wasn't the wrong information. So for example, if Johnny and Mary are having an argument on the playground, and then Mary runs to her best friend Sally and says, "Oh, Sally, Johnny has just hit me." We don't want Sally to say, "Well, did you hit him back?" We don't want Sally to be giving the wrong peer support. We wanted our peers to be able to set a good example for Mary. We wanted our peers to be able to approach the situation um, in the correct way, in a not an aggressive way, not a passive aggressive way, but in a kind, respectful, and assertive way. So that's where this light bulb moment kind of happened for us, is that we realized that as nice as we are as practitioners, as great as much as we want people to come to us for help, and we know that we're open to it, the students themselves may not always be ready to open up to us. There's a higher percentage chance of them wanting to open up to a peer. So let's give the peers these tools that they can provide this mental health support to. And what's interesting is Lifeline also has a similar project underway, which we are very excited to see which direction the project goes. And I've spoken with Lifeline just initially to see what could we do, how could we work together to grow this concept. And it's coming down to the fact that we have a lot of guidance internationally on how these peer-to-peer programs have worked overseas, Australia, New Zealand, the USA. But we would really like to see, how does this look practically in a school? What does it look like in a school? How do I make this program work? Because there's quite a lot of work that goes into setting this program up. And that's what originally got me thinking, how do we do this? And that led me down another rabbit hole. My life is full of rabbit holes. And that's where I started embarking on this journey to find out about the peer-to-peer program.
Yeah, and yeah, to be honest, the rabbit hole has sort of led you into a real. It sort of led you into a positive. It's had a positive outcome. I mean, it's really helped a lot of students. Now, for our members, especially for the teachers and people who are in the education sector, now this program, it's just if I'm correct, Robyn, it's
Yeah,
just
this is
been
a pilot
pioneered. Like
program
this
for
is
us at the school. We initiated
mm,
a small session last year, but this has been our pilot program officially this year. Correct.
mm, mm. Now, I just wanted to understand what the steps were behind it. Like what what exactly was the process, and what was some of the resources that you went to or that you drew from in terms of establishing this program? Before we go into the steps, I just wanted to understand, because you have sort of like this history of being very in tune with research and and sort of relating that to the issues that you face in the treating room or with your students. Now, what was some of the resources and research that helped you put
Yeah.
this program together?
So I definitely had to do a lot of looking around to see what other programs were doing. But one of the particularly helpful places that I found information was the Anna Freud National Center for Children. They had a toolkit, which I'm yet to get my hands on, because this is where my hurdles came in, is the practical step-by-step toolkits on how to develop this program. But Anna Freud gave me the baseline information, and most of the information that I needed in order to kickstart the program. So even today, I'm constantly looking for other schools who have implemented this practically to see how they done it. I believe at one stage the CDC also had steps that schools could follow in the USA. But ultimately, we wanted to find something that was practical for us in our school. Our school has a unique setup in that it consists of a lot of third culture kids. So third culture kids are, for an example, dad may come from, let's say, China. Mom may come from Portugal, and they've come to Fiji for work purposes. So there are now 3 different cultures, all combined to create one human being. So there are, again, just so many different cultural aspects that we take into account when we're setting up our program and steps that follow. So that was our first initial thing, is to be mindful
Mm,
that, yes, we can look at the other steps that other schools have taken, but will that practically work for us? But a big part of us setting it up was the fact that the students themselves wanted to be involved in setting up the program. And that's where we actually started asking the kids, or the students rather, what is your opinion? What would you like from this program? So that was a really good start.
Yeah. And for those that have been at the Anna Freud Center, it's pretty well renowned for being uh, sort of like some of the pioneers of psychoanalytic work and working closely with children and their defenses. And it's really amazing that you've been able to draw inspiration from their literature and all these theories. But in terms of, because you stressed the key point there about third,
Mhm.
third culture kids, like third culture kids, and how that sort of relates to the work that you're doing. Now, in terms of your work, and because we talked a bit earlier about culture and how we have different views and sort of putting those views in the back burner. Now, with these kids, do they have this constant shifting worldviews, or in terms of their own cultural experiences, or how is that? What's it been like being able to work with kids of such a
Yeah,
diverse?
that's an interesting question, Johnny. And I'm lucky enough to be working at an international baccalaureate school here in Bandy. And the philosophy of an IB school is ultimately it wants to be able to help students learn what it is to be human. And part of how the IB philosophy does that is they have what's called learner profiles. So a learner profile is creating the profile of a student who is a thinker, who is caring, who is a good communicator, who is empathetic. And all of these profiles bring together a person who is not only experiencing third cultures and the culture of your host country, but it's also creating an individual who can one day bring the world together. So I'm really lucky in a sense that working with this particular um, group of human beings has been able to help us develop the peer-to-peer support program in a more open platform, a more welcoming platform. And again, that's where the welcoming comes in. Is uh, there was always a lot of excitement to the peer-to-peer program, and I believe that's because we're lucky enough to be in the setting that we are in at the school. Yeah, and that's when we started with the steps. Shall I tell you what our steps were?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yes, please.
we
I
say,
was just
yeah.
about to ask you
I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
I always get excited about it, and I won't go into too much detail because I'm sure that our listeners have got a lot on their plates. But I'll give you an overview because it's really quite exciting to see the whole program come together. Um, so essentially, how we started is we actually asked the students, "What would you like from the program? How do you see this program of peer to peer support helping your school and helping your friends and helping your peers?" So we went to the oldest group of students at the time and we asked them these questions. And one of the very first things they asked is, "Please, can we have a 2-year gap in between the older student who's going to mentor the younger student?" And my first question was, "How come? What makes you feel like that's a good age group?" And they felt as though the student who was 2 years younger would be more open to asking them questions than a student who is 3 years younger or 4 years younger. Now, in a perfect world, we actually would like to remove all boundaries and be able to have a student who's 10 feel comfortable enough to go up to a student who's 18 years old if they need help. So we'll aim to try and increase that gap as much as possible. But it's really important that we give the students ownership of the program. And that's where their first step of ownership came in. And the second thing that they really asked for was they'd like to be able to have a say or identify who they feel they could mentor. And which also a lot of the research that I found indicated that the mentor program is going to be successful if the relationship between the mentor and the mentee is a healthy one. They really have to get on naturally in order to do it. So that's when our next step came in and we did speed friending. So there was one line of students and another line of students, and they would have 1 minute to ask questions to each other. and then the bell would go, and then the one line would step one person to their left. And so the rotation would begin of them getting to know each other. So then they asked, could we vote for who we would really like to be a buddy? But we also had to explain to them that we can't have everybody voting for little Johnny, because what about Mary and what about Sally? So that's why we said, okay, pick your top 5 uh, students who you feel like you could most, who you feel like you have most, a biggest connection to. So we got them to identify their top 5, and then we took a look at their personalities using their requests and using what we felt would work, and we kind of molded it all together to find the best buddy to buddy. And then the next couple of steps is we also realized that it has to be a lot of icebreakers in order for the students to bond. And not all people are extroverted. Not all people are comfortable in new situations. So we would often give the students a list of questions that they could ask their younger buddies. Do you like eating or drinking soup? If you were an animal, what would it be? And you can add a bit of humor into it to make the students really enjoy the questions. But always just giving them some guidelines really helped them. And then another thing was just giving them choice to decide what activity they wanted to do.
Right.
So yeah, a couple of steps down the line is we are now at a stage where we have a buddy competition. So the older student and their younger buddy, and the younger buddy's younger buddy and the younger buddy's younger buddy are all now getting together and competing to create either a kite or a poster, or they could also perform a song that represented their cultures, as well as including the Fijian culture into the project. And then they get to compete with each other in a friendly way to see what that looks like. So what we've also noticed is throughout this project, we're really trying to get the older mentors to show empathy and understanding for the younger students, because a lot of the research indicates that by increasing empathy within students, you can actually decrease the number of incidents of bullying within a setting. So we're hoping that with this increased bullying, with this increased empathy that we're seeing from the mentors and understanding and reaching out to the younger students, that we actually are setting a good role model, or setting a good example rather, for the younger students, so that they can decrease ultimately to see whether or not we have less incidents in our school. So I think at the end of the program of this year, because we didn't collect any data at the beginning of the program, we are just going to collect a survey information. And again, this is recommended by my professor, Annie Crooks at USP. She's just recommended at least a survey at the end of this program to identify, do you feel like you've changed in any way after the buddy program? Do you feel like you understand a student more from their perspective now that you've done the buddy program? So we can at least identify whether or not the students themselves are becoming more empathetic. And hopefully this will be able to decrease the incidence of bullying and anxiety within the school, and create a sense of belonging, so that the students don't feel intimidated to go up to an older student.
Sure. Wow, yeah. It's having that be like a cornerstone of the program, like instilling empathy, because empathy for people, for us that understand, just for the viewers, empathy really is our ability to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of another person, to understand their feelings, understand their emotions. And having you instill it or teach that in such a young age, because a lot of times, we aren't really told that when we are younger. We aren't really told to have these experiences or to treat people. It's always when we were younger, it was always under the understanding that you had to be good, or you had to be you had to just be a good person. Basically, that's what it is. Like you treat people well. But then there's a whole difference to that in terms of empathy, because it's one point to treat people well, but then it's another point to actually understand and come from it, or see things from their perspectives. And I think it's amazing that you're doing that, or you're trying to teach them from such a young age. And, what's that experience been like in terms of having all these activities, instilling this empathy? How have the
Yeah,
students
it's such a
responded
good
to this?
question because what I've experienced and what I've found is that I've become more empathetic and I've become kinder. I've become calmer. I've become more respecting of other individuals around me because of the culture within the school. And uh, I what we're trying to encourage again the students to do is to become those role models themselves. So in particular, myself, I wanted to be a role model for this, for empathy. So modeling empathy is incredibly important for us as adults, especially when it comes to parents at home. It's so important that a parent models empathy because empathy is not taught, it's caught. Kids need to watch empathy so that they
Mm.
can become more empathetic. So if we can get more adults to model empathy, our younger generation will continue to model that empathy and become and the environment essentially will become more peaceful. Um, Obviously, kindness, other factors will be mixed into it as well. But if we can model empathy for younger generation students, it can solve a lot of our problems, especially for parents at home. If a parent has a moment where they can go and be giving and volunteer somewhere, and their child can witness them volunteering and giving to somebody else or putting themselves in another person's perspective, if a parent can model empathy, that is just golden, absolute golden, because then their child will do the same.
Mm. Yeah, and it draws back to a key point about the importance of just basically practicing the right things as a parent, yeah, and the whole family dynamic in itself. Because one thing that, and I'm sure you've probably heard this, read about this in your work with the Anna Freud Center, but parental influence and how children actually mirror their parents' attitudes and lifestyles as they get older. It's a really important factor. And I was just on the
Yeah.
last note because we're probably coming close to the hour mark, but I just wanted to pose a last question though. In terms of this program and your visions of it and your expectations of it, say if you were to, because I know that there'll be a lot of community and youth leaders that will be watching this, and they'll probably want to take inspiration from the things that you're doing right now in terms of building this peer-to-peer support and having this be a mechanism of mental health support. Now, what do you think could be some of the takeaways that they could take from the
Mhm.
program that you're describing? And how do you think this would translate into local
Yeah.
communities
Yeah, it's
in the Fijian
such a good
context?
idea. If let's say we have a church group who decides to have a peer-to-peer um, mental health support program, one of the key aspects of the program that we'll also improve even more on next year is training your mentors. So it's so incredibly important to train your mentors to be able to give good advice when the younger child runs up to their mentor for help, making sure that the mentor is staying calm, making sure that the mentor is maintaining eye contact, making sure that the mentor is using kind words, using respectful words, making sure the mentor isn't blaming anybody at that stage. So really giving the mentor the techniques and the skills that they need to be a good role model is one of the biggest steps that this program needs to take in order to be successful. Um, Increasing the number of hours to training our mentors will probably happen for our peer-to-peer mental health program next year. Teaching them how to paraphrase, teaching them how to uh, encourage the student to go to adult for help. Most importantly, for child protection reasons, is teaching your mentor that if there are any red flags, that there may be some abuse taking place at home, that mentor should either encourage the child to go with them for help to an adult or go to an adult on their behalf for help. So that's one of the most important aspects as far as child protection goes. And another child protection aspect of the program, if church groups would like to do it, if sports groups would like to implement it, is unfortunately in a child protection environment, we have to consider that sometimes a peer may be a potential predator. So we really have to ensure that the program is taking place under complete supervision. So we don't encourage peer-to-peer support in private areas because you want to decrease hidden areas and you want to increase exposure in order to reduce your child protection risks. So that's why we always say to the mentors, if you're going to be with your mentee or your younger buddy, make sure that it's at school, make sure it's during the buddy program, make sure there's an adult around, but don't be with your younger buddy in private at any time. And it's not saying, we're not saying that everybody out there is a predator. We're just saying, let's take the steps to make sure everybody remains safe, even if it means being super safe or extra cautious. Let's rather take these steps to make sure that we protect all of the younger students who are participating in the support program.
Well, it's I just like because we're coming to the end of
Yeah.
our session right now. I just like to I just like to thank you though for being here. We discussed a lot about peer to peer mental health and how important programs like this are, and the great work that you're doing and the steps that you've taken. And it's really great to see that you've you've taken such an informed step towards it, like constantly reverting to research and using data and sort of quantifying your progress in a way that it doesn't just become a, a, a progress based on opinions or progress based on what you see, but rather based on actually validate. And I just like to say that it's amazing work, Robyn, and I'm pretty sure that this program is going to yield some
Yeah,
really
we hope
positive
so.
results.
We hope so. Let's wait for the date, Claire.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Um, but once again, thank you so much, Robyn. And for our viewers, please stay tuned. This is actually a two-part series. We'll be having Robyn next on the next episode of our podcast, and we're going to be discussing a very key issue, which sort of segues from what we were talking about today, and talk about the issue of bullying and how her work has sort of stemmed and looked into ways that we can try and minimize this, and also look at effective strategies that can be implemented. So once again, thank you so much, Robyn, for being
Thank
such an
you.
amazing guest.
No,
I'm
it's great.
sorry it
Thank you
took
for
so
having
long.
me, and we'll see you for the next episode to see peer to peer and how it helps with bullying, and we can talk a bit about bullying. I look forward to it.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Robyn. For our viewers, please like and subscribe if you want more details, or if you're looking to join the society, please contact us on the email at the bottom of our description page. Once again, thank you very much, Robyn, and
See you next
I will
week.
see you guys next week.